The demon lord of deception, being the god of the Confederates, functionally distributes all of their fraud as a way of life. Take, for instance, the function of the constitutional position of cruel and unusual punishment. Scalia said that the abuses against those being investigated as a thing for being owed a quick trial, removing them from the temporary holding cells, is systematically ignored in favor of exaggerating the amount of time it takes to make the trial so that they can conduct the punishments in the holding, and in the act of holding them, conduct cruel and unusual punishment. But to the retaliations, Scalia said that the cruel and unusual punishment can't apply because it can't be considered a punishment because they haven't received due process, which is blatantly a deception, as the function of a cruel and unusual punishment does not create the existence or definition of a punishment to be after due process, but requires due process. The sophistry of these degenerates compounds this concept exponentially as a way of life. It is the entirety of their existence. Put them into a legal reality, and they would die of starvation on the basis of being too functionally incompetent to survive, as their entire means of existence is derivative of scams. Now take their Fraz-Urb'luu, their god, into consideration. The mechanism of him having been tricked by a witch in order to break a staff, generating his exponential weakness, which translates in the multiverse through various methods and narratives. But functionally, his power was in the staff, and in breaking the staff, he ingested mass chaotic evil. And while he was fundamentally lawful evil, this created an exponential weakness, making him trappable. And to that end, he's generated an extraordinary hatred for humankind, well beyond normal demonic hatred. And to this end, you generate the precepts of their seething irrationality, their delusions and their deceptions becoming exponentially more lazy as a mechanism of expressing the rage generated, and thus the lack of thought put into each and every con. They are blatantly themselves demonic haters of the human race, which they have rejected, and it would be deceptive in order to call them human, as their mutated variations have excluded them from the category of the species. With this in mind, you understand that the KKK kangaroo courts, derivative of that function, impersonating legal courts, are not conducting legal court functions, and are not qualified in the United States rule of law, as they are disbarred as a foreign court, without authority or jurisdiction, disbarring every single one of them as a matter of precedent for the American law to protect itself from those that would violate its pretexts, and thus the disqualification throws them out of the legal procedure, and to that end they generate loyalty to process over legality, and to the extent that it is process over legality, they fully separated themselves into anarchy, which is the polar opposite to law. And to that end, the tolerance of their existence is suicidal. And with this in mind, you understand that their core nature, being the same exponential weakness as their god, in the example with the staff, generates the position of tricking those that they wish to sacrifice into being sacrificed under the false moralities which generate the compounding interests until finally a fake nobility generates a position of switching out victims of the sacrifice and given an illusion derivative of the good to receive their heavens, reveals on maturity the thing they were loyal to and sacrificed themselves for, and have bound their soul to, was the demoniac, who will slowly unveil and peel away the illusion until they devour that soul. God is good. But to this extent, the United States, being targeted by that structure, is being sacrificed in this way, and must be saved from these delusional psychopathies. These suicidal mechanisms must be challenged by the removing of the sedition as to break the illusion, and allow in their stupid, befuddled manner to acquire the sobriety, and, upon the realization of themselves, remove all of the seditions, and enforce the law, and punish the insurrections, by which the Confederacy has functioned from. And this is why the Confederates look for secrecies in order to protect their support structures, similar to those looking for the chemicals in the death penalty, which is understood as a thing that they want to protect themselves because they know that it is not an American activity, and as a Confederate activity is not lawful, making them aiding and abetting a murder without due process for the functional interests, and thus the existence of punishing those that are presumably innocent with that death from the Klan rally, simply derivative of those seeking to dress up like ghosts and ghouls in order to scare people and intimidate them as the function of a hate crime from their hate group as its functional society maintains itself amongst the creation of their illusions for the delusions, manufactures the understanding that while they are lying to everyone else, they do understand what it is, and thus actively seek to protect themselves from the record, to be able to prevent the investigations, to be able to discover their identity, lest the Americans win the Civil War and enforce the law. And thus, the protections against retaliation is not a retaliation against arbitrary members of society. No, that would be ironic and uniquely specifically accurate in its deliciousness. No, the thing that they are running away from is the law, the centralized power. Those who want to claim that the Second Amendment is faulty want to say that the government should have centralized power. And to the extent that they wish to have centralized power, the argument is that the law should have the centralized power in order to mediate between all other parties impartially, which is a reasoned argument that is not stupid on its face. But to this extent, that would require the law to have possessed the weapons. And if the law possessed the weapons, and is in that case directly derivative of the authority of the use of all agents, then there is nothing that they could protect themselves from except the law, which they have already conceded is the only authority that may justly do so, and thus it would be an act of insurrection by seeking to overthrow the acknowledged authority. One might call it insurrection, an acknowledgement of the disloyal amongst the Confederates who have infected the executive. Centralizing all of the weapons is the reason that the Second Amendment exists. And to that extent, their ignoring of constitutional law, purging all American judges, makes sure that the law isn't the one owning the weapons. And the same goes for lawful legislations, which can just as easily be ignored outside of direct functions of impeachment, but I'm sure that they'll get rid of that eventually, or have secretly already done so. And to this extent, the mechanism of removing all authority from the alternative mechanisms destroys the other branches holistically. In this ritual sacrifice to their demon lord, to their master, deception. Now, some have theorized that Fraz-Urb'luu, having invested himself in all of his deceptions, holistically engrossing himself in each of the roles, has created for himself alternative puppets by which to digest his powers. But in his ability to divest his powers, they include the function of specialties, which, if certain spells might be believed, could allow him to relent his chaotic evil portions, amplified exponentially by the broken staff, into these subordinate demon lords that express their roles in his illusions, that in the activity many of his enemies may be killed in the illusions, like a House of Mysteries type of arrangement, where they, being thrown into a maze, are systematically murdered by its various difficulties, including but not limited to those that claim to reflect the lawful good, or even the fae, making all things exponentially dangerous, a beautiful, entrancing, intoxicating, deadly lie. Like a flowery praying mantis, is death in a can. And unlike the other demon lords, he does like to sustain himself off of the souls, and while the others merely let them recycle for the abuse, he consumes them as sustenance. And as the deceptions engross themselves about, it seeks to corrupt and manipulate and distort every kind of thing, even the function of the Catholic Church, which must make cathedrals that house his gargoyles, that he might perch upon them and enjoy the succulence of all of his delicious devastations, that his cruel manipulation and distortion of the thing might be expressed, and if deception is capable, then it might even be able to convince others that the illusion is the reality. and if they can convince them that the illusion is reality, they can start overlapping the illusion into reality, facilitating the next targets for capture and consumption. The twisted extortions of each difficult decision generates a series of scripts to maintain the maze's checkpoints, which all have a single conclusion. And to this subject, the Immaculate movie, generating a precise example of the type of thing that would inherently be true of this specific narrative, would be the mechanism of their attempts to create the Antichrist through its ritual procedures for the ending of the world, and to this extent, the services derivative of exponentially increasing their power would make whichever entity capable of doing so the larger power in that branding of hierarchy, allowing him to come up from behind. Now, if I haven't completely butchered it, then it might be explainable from the content why Batman cannot kill the Joker, as that would be the sacrificial breaking of the staff, transferring the intoxicants of the chaotic evil expressed into the Demon Lord, which would then transfer to another party, and thus the mechanism of the Joker being infinitely diversifiable, as if he dies, then there's always going to be another, means that the chaos would transfer to the next, and to the next, and to the next, as they engage in the function of high-risk things, which to the outsider would view in a disconnected manner as entertainment, would increase the likelihood of actually dying, and thus the mechanism of the spirit of that chaotic evil transferring to the next party that would have killed them would ingest itself into the Batman, into the Bat who laughs, as it would be the full ritual embodiment of their demon lord's chaos, seething through the raging veins, as this creates the embodiment of the purpose of their maze, by which good people are given hard choices, requiring them exclusively to crit at an unnatural rate as the only way for them to have progressed untainted, which would include the investment into actual bravery of the use of force, risking the function of major catastrophic conflicts in order to have defeated the thing that would obtain them. And in these extraordinary positions, timing and precision is paramount above all. And to this extent, they can't just overpower the party and make them go through those various decisions, as the function of the Mormon Satan in its compelled morality would dilute the function of the ritual, as it is the person that has to be tainted and not merely the observation of a movie, which can be as real life as possible, to the extent that it is simply an extension of a movie or an improv skit. It generates no internal changes, as the person is not the one choosing. It is merely the observation of somebody else's choice as they play a role of another character to embody their ideal, And to the extent that that would be true, it cannot be corrupting outside of the weak-willed that would not have made it that far.